Hello students, I am Professor Smita Jha from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, and I am here to discuss research methodology. Well, we are moving very systematically because I have started methodology, then methods, and then different types of research. Now, this is the high time to discuss hypothesis in research, because hypothesis is very important to foreground the entire discussion on the research, because in my opinion, research is an argument. Writing a research hypothesis is a pivotal step in any scientific inquiry, serving as the foundation upon which the entire studies are built. Whether you are delving into the mysteries of particle physics or exploring the intricacies of human behavior, formulating a clear and concise hypothesis is essential for guiding your research and drawing meaningful conclusions. Now, here in this discussion, we will understand how to write a research hypothesis that sets the stage for rigorous investigation. We shall explore what a hypothesis is, why it is important, and the key components that make up a well-formed hypothesis. From identifying the variables at play to establishing the direction of your study, we shall provide practical tips and examples to help you to articulate your hypothesis with precision and clarity. Hypothesis is usually considered as an important mechanism in research. Hypothesis is a tentative assumption made in order to test its logical or empirical consequences. If we go by the origin of the word, it is derived from the Greek word hypothethaniai, meaning to put under or to suppose. Etymologically, hypothesis is made up of two words, hypo and thesis, which means less than or less certain than a thesis. It is a presumptive statement of a proposition or a reasonable guesses based upon the available evidence which the researcher seeks to provide through his study. A hypothesis can be defined as a tentative explanation of the research problem, a possible outcome of the research, or an educated guess about the research outcome. Good and Hart have defined it as a proposition which can be put to test to determine its validity. A hypothesis is a hunch, assumption, suspicion, assertion, or an idea about a phenomenon, relationship, or situation, the reality or truth of which you do not know. A researcher calls these assumptions hunches, hypotheses, and they become the basis of an inquiry. In most studies, the hypothesis will be based upon your own or someone else's observation. Hypothesis brings clarity, specificity, and focus to a research problem, but is not essential for a study. You can conduct a valid investigation without constructing formal hypothesis. The formulation of hypothesis provides a study with focus. It tells you what specific aspects of a research problem to investigate. In the scientific method, whether it involves research in psychology, biology, humanities, social sciences, or other area, a hypothesis represents what the researchers think will happen in an experiment. The scientific method involves the following steps: forming a question, performing background research, creating hypothesis, designing an experiment, and collecting data, analyzing the results, drawing conclusion, communicating the result. The hypothesis is a prediction, but it involves more than a guess. Most of the time, the hypothesis begins with a question which is then explored through background research. At this point, researchers then begin to develop a testable hypothesis. The proceeding "try this" asks you to recall that to identifying interesting questions, matching appropriate method, considering possible answer, and reflecting on this process to improve it in future iterations is the process of conducting research. So research does not start with a thesis statement. it starts with a question. And though research is recursive, which means that you will move back and forth between various stages in your research and writing process, developing an effective question might in itself be the most important part of the research process. Because there is really no point in doing a research project if you already know the answer. Well, that is boring. But it is how we are often taught to do research. We decide what we are going to argue. We look for those things that support that argument. And then we write up the thing that we knew from the outset. If that sounds familiar, we suggest that you scrap that plan. Instead, we suggest approaching research with an orientation of openness, ready and willing to be surprised, to change your mind. Of course, you never approach research in a vacuum. You probably have ideas about whatever it is that you are working on. You probably have thoughts about what the answers are to your research questions, and that is as it should be, but that a statement of belief should not be where you start. In a study exploring the effects of a particular race, the hypothesis might be that researchers expect the race to have some type of effect on the symptoms of a specific illness. In psychology, the hypothesis might focus on how a certain aspects of the environment might influence a particular behavior. Remember, a hypothesis does not have to be correct. While the hypothesis predicts that what the researcher expects to see, the goal of the research is to determine whether this guess is right or wrong. As you familiarize yourself with an issue and the way scholars have talked about it, take note of the specific ways they talk about the issue and consider why that is. This is how you develop a rhetorical awareness of the ways in which research is constructed. So, when you read like a researcher. Consider both what is said about an issue and how it is said. Identify the rhetorical situation of the piece of writing. This includes the context in which it is written, the audience for whom it is written, and its purpose. In many cases, researchers might draw a hypothesis from a specific theory or build on previous research. For example, prior research has shown that stress can impact the immune system. So, a researcher might hypothesize people with high stress levels will be more likely to contract a common cold after being exposed to the virus than people who have low stress levels. The benefit is that the hypothesis makes selecting appropriate research methods or statistical means possible, making the analysis more effective and achieving a result. Above all, the idea selected for the research also makes the study more focused, and the hypothesis does that best of all. Finally, when researchers propose and test a hypothesis, they can confirm, enhance, reconsider, or reject any theories. What is the importance of hypothesis in research? Well, guide the research process. A hypothesis gives a study a clear direction as it outlines what you intend to study and establishes the relationship you are trying to find between variables. It is precise and to the point, which helps formulate your research questions and plan your method. Using a hypothesis helps organize the testing process from the beginning to the end of the study. It also defines the variables. Well-formulated hypothesis specifies the independent and dependent variables. It defines the object of manipulation and measurement. According to the definition, the hypothesis is an assumption about the relationship between the objects of a study. Since statistics is a field of research, the hypothesis is a predictive statement that can be tested empirically. It facilitates testability and empirical investigation. A well defined hypothesis indicates a clear relationship between the studied variables, thus, providing a foundation for designing experiments and observations. In some cases, a null hypothesis is stated to subsequently apply the appropriate statistical test to either validate an already formulated and appropriate hypothesis or reject it. It enhances objectivity. A hypothesis helps to minimize researcher bias by proposing a specific prediction. It forces the researcher to rely on empirical data rather than subjective opinion or belief. This objectivity is crucial for maintaining the integrity of the scientific process and ensuring that the findings are credible and reliable. Promotes critical thinking and theoretical framework. Creating a reasonable and viable hypothesis starts with deeply understanding the problem and the field. With a clear sense of the scope of existing evidence and knowledge, there would be a way to go beyond what other researchers have already done. By thoroughly reviewing the literature, researchers are in a position to critically evaluate it and identify problems or questions that remain unresolved. It enables a structured analysis and interpretation. A hypothesis is a tentative assumption that provides a context for data analysis and interpretation. It allows for determining a specific statistical test to run and understanding how to interpret them. If the results support the hypothesis, then there is sufficient evidence to claim and infer that the chosen variables are related in a particular way to each other. If the hypothesis does not match the outcomes, it raises the question of the theoretical assumption supporting it and additional testing that may be indicated. Drive scientific progress. Testing hypotheses continually allows researchers to enrich knowledge beyond merely investigating a particular aspect. The data supporting both hypotheses, the data refuting them may give rise to new theories, which may serve as the foundation for new research. Such a loop significantly benefits researchers who need to extend their understanding of a particular aspect of outer world. What are the types of research hypotheses? This is the high time to know. First, simple hypothesis. A simple hypothesis posits a relationship between two variables. It suggests a direct cause and effect relationship without specifying the direction of the effect. Like example, increased exercise leads to improved cardiovascular health. Second, complex hypothesis. Complex hypotheses involve a relationship between multiple variables. These hypotheses may propose how several factors interact to produce a particular outcome. For example, the interaction between genetic predisposition, diet, and exercise influence longevity. Third, associative hypothesis. An associative hypothesis suggests that there is a relationship between two variables, but it does not imply causation. It states that changes in one variable are associated with changes in another. For example, there is a correlation between income level and access to healthcare services. Fourth, causal hypothesis. Causal hypothesis asserts that changes in one variable directly cause changes in another. It implies a cause and effect relationship that can be tested through experimentation or controlled observation. For example, increased consumption of sugary drink causes an increase in body weight. Next, directional hypothesis. A directional hypothesis predicts the direction of the relationship between variables. It specifies whether one variable will increase or decrease in response to changes in another variables. For example, higher levels of education lead to higher income levels. Next, Non-directional hypothesis. A non-directional hypothesis does not predict the direction of the relationship between variables. It simply suggests that there is a relationship without specifying whether one variables will increase or decrease in response to change in another variables. For example, there is a relationship between social media use and levels of anxiety. Next, null hypothesis. The null hypothesis states no significant relationship exists between the variables being studied. It proposes that any observed differences or effects are due to random chance or sampling error. It is often used to test against the alternative hypothesis, which proposes the existence of a relationship or effect. For example, there is no significant difference in test scores between students who study with music and students who study in silence. So, how to develop a research hypothesis? Developing a research hypothesis involves a systematic process to ensure clarity, testability, and relevance to the research question. Now, let us see the step by step guide to develop research hypothesis. Step 1. Identify the research problem or question. Start by clearly defining the research problem or question you want to investigate. This could be based on the gaps in existing literature, observations, theory, and practical issues. Step 2. Review existing literature. Conduct a thorough review of relevant literature to understand what is already known about the topic. Identify theories, findings, gaps in knowledge that can help to inform the development of your hypothesis. Step 3. Specify variables. Identify the variables involved in your study. Variables are measurable traits, conditions, or characteristics that can change or vary. Specifically, determine. Independent variable, the factor you manipulate or study in your research. Dependent variable, the outcome or response you are measuring or observing about the independent variable. Step 4. Formulate a hypothesis. Formulate a clear and a specific hypothesis based on your research problem, literature review, and identified variables. A good hypothesis should state the expected relationship between the independent and dependent variables. Be testable through empirical research method. Be concise and specific, avoiding ambiguity. Now, example, simple hypothesis: increased exposure to sunlight leads to higher level of vitamin D in human. Directional hypothesis: children who participate in regular physical activity will have lower levels of obesity than children who do not. Non-directional hypothesis: there is a relationship between job satisfaction and employee turnover. Step 5. Consider alternative hypothesis. While formulating your hypothesis, consider alternative explanations or hypotheses that could also explain the relationship between your variables. This helps in ensuring that your hypothesis is well grounded and comprehensive. Step 6. Ensure testability. Ensure that your hypothesis is testable using appropriate research methods and techniques. Define how to measure or manipulate the variables to gather empirical evidence supporting or refuting your hypothesis. Stage 7. Write and refine. Write down your hypothesis in a clear and concise statement. Revise and refine it as needed to improve clarity and specificity. Ensure that it aligns with the objectives of your study and effectively addresses the research question. Step 8. Seek feedback. Before finalizing your hypothesis, seek feedback from your colleague, mentor, supervisor, peers in your field. Their input can help identify potential weaknesses or ambiguities in your hypothesis and suggest improvement. Step 9. Finalize your hypothesis. Once you have refined your hypothesis based on feedback and considerations, finalize it. as the guiding statement for your research study. Now, what are the characteristics of a good research hypothesis? First, clear and specific. The hypothesis should be precise in its wording and focus. It should clearly state what the researcher intends to investigate or test. Second, it should be testable. A hypothesis must be capable of being empirically tested and verified or falsified through observation or experimentation. This means that there should be a way to gather data that supports or refutes the hypothesis. Third, falsifiable. There must be possibility of proving the hypothesis false. A hypothesis that cannot be proven false typically falls outside scientific inquiry. This criterion ensures that research remains objective and open to revision based on evidence. Fourth, grounded in theory. A good hypothesis is usually based on existing theories or literature. It should be informed by a solid understanding of the topic and build upon previous research findings or established principle. Fifth, rationale. It should provide a logical rationale or explanation for the expected outcome. This rationale is often derived from the literature review or preliminary observations. 6. Empirical relevance. The hypothesis should address a question relevant to the field of study and contribute to existing knowledge. It should propose a relationship or difference between variables that is worth investigating. 7. Concise. While the hypothesis should be clear and specific, it should also be concise and to the point. It typically consists of a statement or a few sentences summarizing the expected relationship between variables. Eighth, variables. A hypothesis should identify the variables involved and specify how they are expected to relate. This includes independent variables and dependent variables. 9. Observable and measurable. The variables in the hypothesis should be observable and measurable, allowing for data collection that can be analyzed statistically. 10th, revisable. A hypothesis is not a conclusion but a tentative assumption or prediction that guides the research process. It should be open to revision based on the study's finding. Now, the role of DECODE in testing research hypothesis. DECODE is a powerful survey and consumer research platform powered by insights that can be instrumental in testing research hypothesis. Now, how to decode can support you in this process. Survey design and data collection. Craft targeted questioning using DECODE's intuitive interface to gather relevant data for your research. Exploratory research. Conduct exploratory research to understand the language of your topic. Leverage DECODE's functionalities for surveys and feedback mechanisms to gain valuable insights from your target audience. Identifying variables. Design targeted survey questions within DECODE to pinpoint relevant variables crucial to your research topic. Literature review and background research supplements your literature review by collecting data on sample populations, opinion, experiences, and preferences through DECODE surveys. This combined data and a thorough literature evaluation can help you to build a well-grounded hypothesis with a ground foundation in real-world knowledge. Now, testing assumptions. Before solidifying your research hypothesis, informally test your assumption using surveys created on DECODE. This allows for early feedback and potential refinement. Data analysis tools. DECODE provides built-in data analysis tools. Utilize these tools to uncover patterns, correlations, and trends within the data you collect through your survey. Now, refining your hypothesis. As you gather data through DECODE surveys, you can continuously adjust and refine your hypothesis based on the real-world responses you receive. This iterative process ensures your hypothesis stays aligned with the insights you uncover. So, what is hypothesis in research methodology? Guess. It's like making an educated guess about something you want to find out based on your previous knowledge. What you think will happen, you are saying what you believe might be true, might happen based on what you know. Testing idea, it's a statement that suggests what you want to test or explore in your research. Prediction, you are saying what you expect to see or find out when you do your research. Clear statement, it's a clear, specific statement that explains what you are trying to find out or prove based on prior knowledge. It is built on what you already know or what others have found in similar situation. Can be proven wrong. It is something that can be shown to be false if the research does not support it. Guides your research. It's like a roadmap for your study, helping you focus on what is important and what to look for. Helps to formulate questions. It leads to question you can ask and experiments you can conduct to find out if your guess is correct. Foundation of research. It forms the basis of your research, giving you a starting point to investigate and learn more about your topic. Thus, a hypothesis emerges out of existing theories and available knowledge. So, as a researcher, you spend time learning more about topics of your interest. A simple way to do this is to develop a habit of reading popular science articles, science magazines, reviews articles, research papers. Reading scientific literature may draw your attention towards new and emerging areas in research and deepens your understanding of the subject matter. This will enable you to ask original questions that open a fresh line of investigation. Once you have a question, you can read more literature and convert your question into scientific focused and testable hypothesis. So, a hypothesis is centered around variables. Consider the hypothesis manuring helps plants grow tall faster. You can test it by conducting an experiment wherein manure is added to one set of plants and one added to another. Next, you collect data by measuring the heights of plants in both the sets and comparing them to see if they differ. Thus, your hypothesis keeps you focused on the specific trait that you intend to study and how a variable influences it. Now, with this, I conclude the discussion, and here comes the end of hypothesis, which is very, very important. And as I discussed, that it is the assumptions. Assumptions mean forming the thinking, developing thinking for the base of your research. And of course, for developing this thinking habit, what you need is the prior knowledge, something that is already exist. With this, I conclude. Let us meet in another discussion.